And we look at solving trigonometric equations, and this will be a series of lessons that we look at solving trigonometric equations. In our first lesson, we look at cosine function. So let's have a look at cosine example. And it's restricted, our domain is restricted. So our x is from 0 to 2 pi. And we want to find out the value of x within this domain. So that if you look at this one here, it's actually going through the unit circle and ones, covering ones. And we also know that cosine is actually positive in two quadrants, the first and the fourth. The cosine inverse of square root of 2 over 2. Well, cosine, and this is actually based on our unit circle. So just if you didn't understand where the exact value or the exact angle of square root 2 of 2 over 2 is, just to make sure you watch the unit circle recording and that lesson, and that it will make sense to you. So that's going to be pi over 4 or 5 pi. 7 pi, it has to be 7 pi. That's going to be the fourth quadrant, 7 pi over 4. So we know that cosine is actually positive in the first quadrant, and pi, so square root 2 over 2 is pi on 4. And the symmetry to that will be 7 pi over 4. Let's look at another example on this concept of solving trigonometric functions. So in this case, we look at this one here when we have got a coefficient with the x. It's going to be the same, but in this case, I've included a coefficient for the x. And I'm going to use the same domain that I've used before. So just to make sure you multiply the 2 to this domain. So if you multiply 2 to 0, and again, we're going to solve for the x. So cosine inverse, cos inverse, square root 2 over 2. And that gives me a value of pi over 4, 7 pi over 4. So that is only 2 and 2 pi, but that's going to be 4 pi. So that means I have to add 2 pi to this. So that's going to be pi on 4 plus 2 pi. And I'm going to do the same thing for the other one as well. So that gives me an answer of I divide 2 on both sides. And you also have to remember my given domain, which is restricted domain, was that. So I can't actually go above that. So it cannot be bigger than 2 pi. So my x value is this. So 15 pi over 8 is not bigger than 2 pi. This is smaller than 2 pi. So let's have a look at another example. This time I'm going to change. I'm going to use the same example, but this time I'm going to change the coefficient and see what happens. So again, so the first thing I have to do is I'm going to get my coefficient, which is 3, and multiply to this given domain, which gives me 0. And I want to solve for x, cosine inverse, square root 2 over 2. So I know that equals 2. So I have to add 2 pi to that. So that gives me, if I add 2 pi to that, so that gives me 9 pi, because 2 times 4, 8 plus 1, 9. So 9 pi on 4. So add 2 pi to this, so that gives me 15. And add, so now after that, we need to add 2 pi to this, which is 9 pi over 4 plus 2 pi. Well, that gives me 17, because 2 times 4 is 8 plus 9, 17. And I'm going to do the same thing for this one here as well. So I'm going to add 2 pi to that. So 15 pi on 4 plus 2 pi. So 3x. And the last step is I have to divide both sides by 3. And that is the solution for the x. So this time we're going to look at a negative value. So we've looked at all the, so this time I'm going to make my domain a negative. So the negative domain is basically going the clockwise and the anti-clockwise direction. So that means, and I have to, well, this is going to be half cosine is pi on 3. And also we know that cosine is positive is in the first quadrant and the fourth. So that means 5 pi on 3. So we also have to remember that if you look at the clockwise direction, so if you go the clockwise and the anti-clockwise, so this one here, I go the clockwise direction, so that is going to be the negative. If I go clockwise and anti-clockwise direction, both ways I'll actually get 5 and 3 and 5 and 3. So 5 and 3, 5 and 3. So both ways I'll still get 3 with this one negative 5 and 3. So we add and we minus 2 pi. So we remember we have got a coefficient of 2 to the x. So if I multiply that to 2, this stays. So now if I add this 2 pi, so that gives me 7 pi. If I add 2 pi to this, I get that. And if I got the clockwise direction and I add negative 2 pi, well, that gives me negative 7 pi. Negative 11 pi on 3. So, and also we have to remember that we cannot, the original domain, which was negative pi to pi, any obtained value has to be within that given original domain. So let's solve for x. So our next step is to disregard any value of x that is bigger than or that's not within this given domain. So we disregard this because that is more than 1. And we also disregard that, and we also disregard those two. So my final answer, therefore, x is, so we put the negative first, the more negative value. Yeah, and that's it for this lesson. So our next lesson, we look at sine functions.